My name is Adiola Fadipe and I am a barrister. I practice in employment and education. I advise employees, former employees, but also businesses, companies on employment law disputes, and I also represent both parties in tribunal hearings. These are just a few tips, a few headline points that you can consider before going to a performance review meeting. A performance review is really a comprehensive tool that employers use to assess how their employees are doing, but equally, employees are then able to feedback how they think they're doing. They can have a self-assessment on their own work. The reason that I'm doing this video is because sometimes I get calls from individuals who really need help. They need support because sometimes a performance review is precipitated by a period of unease or a period of discomfort, either with the person's line manager or a colleague within the team. And sometimes people are worried, well, I've been called for this performance review, but actually I think I'm doing pretty fine, and I'm concerned that they're going to use it as the means of getting rid of me. So this video really is to just give you a couple of tips that hopefully will equip you and empower you going into that meeting so that you feel more able to put your best foot forward, represent yourself, and hopefully come out with a better outcome or something that you can be happy with. Tip number one is, before you've even gone into that meeting, the first thing that you should do is review some of the feedback that you've received in the past. So you need to reflect on past feedback, whether that's something that you've received from former appraisals or client feedback, maybe in a form of interviews, it may be in a form of emails in your inbox where people have written good feedback. Review the notes, review the emails, and make sure that you have a good idea of how you've been performing or what has been said about your performance in the past, because this should give you a good indication of what the tone of the meeting is going to be like when you get in there. It's also going to help you because you are going to be more prepared to answer questions about your performance, given that you've got the most recent feedback or the most recent appraisals. You've reviewed them, you've looked at them, and you've seen that you had some particular targets and you had to work towards them, and then you can consider whether or not you have actually done that. So tip number two, as part of the performance review meeting, you may be sent information in advance. You may be sent reports, for example. If you are in a commission-based role, you may be sent reports ahead of time about how you're doing, how it's all going. Alternatively, you might be sent qualitative data. So it could be things that people in a team have said about you, or things that your manager's manager has said about you. There's all types of information that you might have been sent in advance of this meeting. And the real key thing that you want to do is you want to review that information and ask yourself, in terms of the numbers, the statistics, sales figures, or anything like that, the first thing you want to be checking is that data accurate? So does it, for example, include the previous 4 weeks? Does it include numbers from a particular client? Maybe you've taken on a new client in the last 2 weeks and their figures haven't updated onto the system. There's all sorts of things that you want to be looking for, but the main thing is this data accurate? Does this data reflect what I've actually been doing? Because it's not unusual for a person to say, well, I'm looking at this data, but actually I have performed really well in the last few weeks. I know I have a rough figure in my head of how many sales I've made, for example. But when I look at this data, it doesn't really reflect that. And it's okay to make a note of that so that when you go into that meeting, you can ask questions, or you can look for more data, or you can try to seek a bigger picture and see exactly what's going on there. When we talk about information being sent in advance, the other thing that you want to check, especially when it comes to qualitative data, so this is things that may have been written about you, this may be client feedback, this might be feedback from your managers, different people on the team. You want to check that that feedback is balanced. Sometimes when people or a manager is looking to gather information, they may only have insight into a select piece of information. So for example, they may only have access to feedback that's been given from the rest of the team. Whereas you, as the employee, might have feedback from clients that your manager has not necessarily been privy to, or even if they're aware of it, it may not be within their possession. And it may be something that is hiding in your inbox, for example, or something that even you have forgotten about. And actually, once you dig it out, you know that, yeah, you have this great feedback and you want it to be considered as part of your performance review. So it's really important that when you're giving information ahead of a performance review, that you actually take that time to ask yourself, is this everything? Is there other relevant information, recent customer feedback that I want to be included as part of this process? The idea is to present as balanced a picture as possible, because sometimes it may be that your manager only ever hears when something goes a bit wrong or doesn't go as planned, and so they have that information to call upon. but you actually know that you've been doing excellent work and you want that to be considered, but your manager might not have the necessary exposure to that level of detail, and you need to be presenting that information. Make sure that you are collating that information so that you too can present some information for that performance review meeting. The third thing that you should consider is the company procedures. So these are things that are available either on the company intranet or in the company handbook. And effectively, what you want to do is equip yourself with the knowledge of how performance reviews work within your particular company. Once you've read this policy, which you can find either on the internet or in a company handbook, the information that you're going to be looking for is timeframes. Timeframes is really important because, for example, if from that performance review meeting you will then set targets, those targets need to be workable and realistic within the time frame given. And sometimes in some organizations, for example, they will say there will be a meeting every 4 weeks to review the progress. But if you go into that meeting and your manager is saying, in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to see if you've done this particular target, or if you've exceeded in this particular area, automatically you may be thinking, well, no, because I've read the policy and it tells me that we need to meet in another 4 weeks to give me the maximum possible time to perform. Reading the policies and the procedures allows you to equip yourself with the information that you're going to need to give yourself the best possible opportunity within that performance review framework to perform at your best. The other thing that reading your policy and procedure is going to do for you is it's going to make sure that you understand all the review steps. The whole point about looking at your policies, company policies, is to make sure that you know what the possible outcomes are when you come out of that performance review meeting. You need to know, is it possible that I might get a written warning? Is it possible I might get a final written warning? Is it possible that I could be dismissed? You won't know that unless you familiarize yourself with the process. There's no shortcut to this. It may sound like a lot of reading, but actually most of the time I find that policies, company policies and procedures, particularly when it comes to performance review meetings, it may be at most 1 or 2 pages. Most of the time it's something that you can review quite efficiently and see exactly what the process is. Now, one point to note is, if you're not sure, if you, for example, you're new to the company or you're relatively new, you've looked in the handbook, you couldn't find anything on performance reviews there, you tried to have a look at the internet and you couldn't find anything there, then just shoot an email to HR and let them know that you need this information ahead of any performance review meeting. It's really important that you have it and you'd like to have a look. And usually they will oblige you. It's not something that should be contentious. It should be something that you are able to look at well in advance of any particular meeting. My fourth tip is to consider taking an independent observer. When I say an independent observer, I mean somebody who is independent of the process, and it may be a colleague, it may be a member of the union, for example. Often when you're invited to a performance review meeting, within that invitation letter, it will tell you whether or not they will allow you to bring someone into that meeting with you. And if that letter of invitation doesn't tell you, for example, if it's just an email and it doesn't say, then you can of course ask whether you are permitted to bring a colleague with you or a member of the union. I think it's important to bring in an independent observer. I'm calling them an independent observer, but sometimes they're also known as companions, witnesses, a colleague, a friend, a family member. And the importance of bringing in such a person is because you have somebody there who is independent of the process, so somebody who hasn't been involved in collating any information, but they're there, they can hear what's going on, they can understand, they can vouch for anything that you're saying within that forum, within that meeting. For example, if it doesn't get captured within the minutes. The other thing is that that person is essentially a source of moral support. Sometimes when you're going into that meeting and it's such a formal process, for some people it can be intimidating. And actually having somebody else there with you will help you to feel less intimidated, because it means that you feel that you have someone there who's on your side, someone there who's there to support you and guide you and you can talk to. It's important to note that obviously somebody who's there as a companion won't be able to answer questions on your behalf, for example, but they may be able to ask questions on your behalf. But also what you can do is you can adjourn the meeting, you can go off with your companion and you can speak to them, you can discuss what's going on and let them know how you're feeling, just so you have that checkpoint, somebody that's really there to assist you. The other thing to mention is sometimes this person is actually a representative. So if you're a member of the union, you pay your union dues every month, then I think it's really important that you have a union representative in that meeting with you, because that person is going to be really knowledgeable, they're going to be able to steer the process and really support you. So I definitely encourage you, if you're a member of the union, to take a union representative with you into that meeting. For some of you, you're not a member of the union or your workplace doesn't recognize a union. It's okay to take a trusted colleague or somebody else into that meeting with you. And also, if there's no colleagues that you trust, it may be that you want to take a family member or a friend. And I believe most of the time there's flexibility to ask the manager or ask your company if that's something that they're okay with, if it's something that you can do. The fifth tip that I have for you is to remember that this is a two-way conversation. That means that your manager is the person chairing the performance review meeting, or whoever the person is chairing the review meeting. Yes, they're going to have some documents that they might want to talk to you about. They might have some questions for you. They might have an assessment of how they think you're doing. But within that process, you also have a voice, and you can exercise your right to speak about your growth, your progress, feedback that you've received, the things that you think maybe they're not considering them. It's really important that as part of that process, you are vocal. Before you've even entered the meeting, you should write down, just jot a few points down, the things that you want to ensure come across within that performance review meeting, the things that you think, actually, I've had some good wins and these people need to know about it. Or I think the last appraisal wasn't a fair assessment of my abilities, and actually these are things that I put in place to work on the feedback that I've received. Whatever it is, just jot down a few points that you want to ensure that going into that meeting, you get them across, you're able to speak to them, and you're able to leave that meeting feeling like, yes, you know what? I did everything that I could do. The other thing that you want to consider is any targets that you're being set. Are they smart? Are they specific? Are they measurable? Are they achievable? Are they realistic? Are they time measured? The targets that you're being set, do you have enough time to get them done? I remember I was advising somebody who was going into a performance review meeting. The targets that he was set for that month, the 1 month following the performance review, were more ambitious, as in they were higher than what his whole team had been set for the first quarter of the year. And so automatically when we discussed it, alarm bells were ringing because he was being set up to fail, because it was just completely unrealistic for him to achieve those targets in a set time frame, knowing that ordinarily those are the kind of targets that are set for the whole team over a much longer period. When you're reviewing some of these things, some of the targets you're being set, it's okay to speak up and say, actually, I'm not quite comfortable with this. But whether it's that the targets are too ambitious, or the targets are not well thought through, or the targets are too subjective, you need to really consider those things. Sometimes there may be things that the person conducting the performance review has not considered because they simply don't know. For example, have you had challenges with your health? Do you have a disability? Have you had childcare difficulties? Is there something that they need to know about that is affecting your work, that maybe it's a short-term issue that is causing quite significant concerns within your work, within your day-to-day work life? Because, we are human beings, we're holistic beings, there's so much more to life than just work. And sometimes the reality is our personal begins to impact our professional. Or equally, there may be something professional within the workplace that is impacting your ability to do your job. It's really important that you as an employee are able to convey this to your employer so that they are aware of everything that might be affecting your performance. That is really a matter for you, and some people don't want to share their personal life happenings or things that are going on, but you should use your judgment to consider whether or not you think that it's worthwhile sharing it, whether you think that actually it will help them to understand you as an employee, or whether actually you'd much prefer to just keep your privacy. It's really a matter for you, and I can't tell you. My advice is not telling you you have to say anything. My advice is simply saying, well, you may wish to consider that. It's a matter for you. So that's all of my tips. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this video has been helpful. If you have any questions whatsoever, drop me a comment down below or slide into the DMs. I am very happy to help. And yeah, have a good one. Take care. Bye.